Today's topic is, what do you do when the world is ending? So let me give you an example. When the temple was destroyed, the second temple, we're talking about in the middle of the Mishnaic period. The Mishnah wasn't written until the year 200, but the rabbis who we quote in the Mishnah predate the actual Mishnah by a couple hundred years. And so we're talking like Rabbi Akiva, for example, and earlier rabbis. When the temple was destroyed, the rabbis of that time period say something that is absolutely mind-boggling, especially if you know a little bit about the Jewish people, a little bit about Jewish law, about how Jews practice. What is according to basic understanding, what is the first mitzvah of the Torah? Sorry, I'm not hearing. No,
to believe in
that's
Hashem?
the first mitzvah. Also a good one, but no. The first Rosh Chodesh is the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people as a people. But what's the first mitzvah given as a whole? Say it again. Pru or vu? How do you translate that in English? Be fruitful and multiply. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to have families. To procreate. Correct. It's a mitzvah. So according to Sefer Chinuch, right, which is one of the most famous books going through the mitzvahs and explaining them, it's the first mitzvah in the Torah, because it's the first one that appears in the Torah as a mitzvah to humanity. Be fruitful and multiply. So, yes?
That's only applies to men, because I heard women don't get a mitzvah for having children.
So women do not have a mitzvah in the text. Mm-hmm. Women have a mitzvah in their DNA. Right? Women it's built into female, you ever see My Cousin Vinny? Right? Marissa Tomei, who went to my high school, right? One of the greatest lines in all movie history. My biological clock is ticking like this. Like, isn't it right? Like, women have it natural. Of course, there's always exceptions. Nothing's 100%. But as a general rule, men, we don't have the same built-in desire to have children, mm-hmm. right? We do. We just don't have a built-in desire to stay with them. Right? We have to have a mitzvah from the Torah to command us, get married, be monogamous, and raise a family, right? So men have a mitzvah to have children. Of course, mm-hmm. To fulfill the mitzvah of having children, men have to get married. That's part of the mitzvah process, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really a whole package deal. Okay. So what's so surprising about this Talmud is the Talmud says the following. After the destruction of the temple, the rabbis get together and they had a momentary debate. Should we command the Jewish people to stop procreating, separate from their wives, stop having children, and allow the seed of Avraham to end of its own accord naturally? In other words, the rabbis contemplated national suicide for a moment, which, mind-boggling. For a moment, the rabbis got together and said, should we just end this whole Jewish experiment, right? Because of how unbelievably disastrous, devastating, and horrible the destruction of the temple was. The Roman persecutions, people are sometimes, and they should be, I'm happy that they are shocked and appalled and absolutely blown away by how terrible human beings can be to each other. You look at what, I'm not even going to say any of them. I read the report that was put out by the Knesset about October 7th. I wouldn't suggest reading it unless you have a very strong stomach and don't have a problem having nightmares for a few months or years. Otherwise, don't read it. Just take my word for it. It's horrible. Detailed description of what happened in the attack on October 7th to the people and the populations that were attacked. But what most people don't realize is that October 7th, as horrible as it was, historically speaking, is actually the norm. Mm-hmm. That's how human beings, it's how, not just Jews, although they did it a lot to us, but human beings, when they attacked each other over most of human history, that only started changing like 1,000 years ago. And even then, there were still plenty of really, really bad things. You read Steven Pinker's book, The Angels of Our Better Nature. One of the things that's so fascinating is that the data is clear. We are living in the least violent time in human history. The 20th century, which includes World War I, World War II, Communist China, Communist Cambodia, Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, it goes on and on and on, had the lowest human death by other humans, adjusting for population, of any century on record. And it's kept going lower, although it's having a bit of an uptick. Hopefully it won't last for very long. Right? We don't realize that when people read about the Japanese attack and conquest of the city of Nanking, which are also, again, don't read any books on it unless you don't want to have a good night's rest for a while. And one thing after another, for thousands of years, this is how human beings treated each other. And what the Romans did when they destroyed the Second Temple and also after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the time of Rabbi Akiva is stomach turning even by those standards. What the Romans did to the Jewish people in Israel is, again, I'm not going to say it, you're welcome to research on your own, was so unbelievably horrible. I'll just give you a quick, it's from the Talmud, right? Our rabbis wrote this, so I feel comfortable quoting our rabbis. There was the Romans captured many attractive young men and women to bring back to Rome to use for a certain type of slavery that I think is obvious. And on this boat, the Jewish girls and boys were let up onto the deck to get some air, so they should be healthy. You got to sell them for good money when they get to Rome. And at one point when they were on deck, all of the Jewish girls jumped overboard and killed themselves. And then the Jewish boys said, well, if the girls did this, who are we, to continue? And they jumped after them. And the rabbis of the Talmud point to this as something positive. This was a positive. They said, we applaud them. There are some who say even they shouldn't have done it, and suicide is really forbidden under all circumstances, but most rabbis don't say that. Most rabbis say that suicide under extremely horrific, very, very, very rare circumstances is actually permissible. Again, it's a big discussion. I'm not a posek. I'm not giving you halacha. We should all live and be well, and if you're having any bad thoughts, see a therapist. Like immediately, don't wait. That being said, you can make an argument that under certain unbelievably horrible circumstances, it's not only permitted, maybe even meritorious. The rabbis thought about it for the whole Jewish people. That's how horrible things were. But they didn't. They said, no, we're not going to do that. And when you look through Jewish history as a whole, and you look through specific Jewish communities, and you look through individual Jewish lives, a pattern emerges that is unbelievable. It's so powerful. The Jewish people's response to the end of the world, because our world has ended many times, whether it was the destruction of the temple, whether it was the Holocaust in Europe, whether it was the Chmielniki massacres in the Ukraine, whether it was October 7th for all the communities that were hit by it. What is the Jewish response for thousands of years? In 99.9% of circumstances, obviously we pointed out a couple that are exceptions, but in 99.9% of circumstances, what is the Jewish response? To what I'm going to quote, forgive me for in the middle of the Torah class, quoting President Trump. Actually, was it him? I'm not sure if he said this. Who said this? We're going to build back better. Was that him? Okay.
Who else would say that?
I don't know. I try not to pay attention to politics that much anymore. I did for a little while. Again, thanks to my mom, she gave me a conservative manifesto by Mark Levin when Obama was president. I think many people had I was going to say spiritual, a political awakening under the Obama presidency. But I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to pray. Go back to what we said earlier. That's probably vote and pray, right? That's what we're doing. Okay, so the Jewish response again and again and again, and it's actually pretty mind-boggling, is that after all the terrible destruction, it's something that is so hard to imagine. Imagine somebody in 1945. I'll give you an example. So my karate teacher, he should live and be well, Sensei Alex Sternberg, his parents are Hungarian Holocaust survivors. Right? They were both in the camps. They survived. But I don't remember his mother's family. I just don't remember. But I know that his father had a whole family. Married, children, everything. Lost everything. His wife was killed. His children were killed. His aunts, his uncles, his brothers, his sisters. I don't know if there was like anyone left. The horror is unimaginable. And what does this guy do? Right after the war, within months, he marries at like 40 years old. 40. I'm 48. Okay, so it's relatively close, right? Someone who's in their 40s, that means he got probably, early 20th century Hungary. When did he get married? 20 years old? Probably not that much later, right? That means he had spent decades with wife and children, building a whole family, all gone. And what does he do? Gets married again and builds a new family. Wound up having two brothers, my sensei and his older brother, right? Built a new family. And not only that, right? You probably heard again, and I never ever judge anyone because I don't know what I would do under the circumstances, and God forbid I even have a tiniest iota of a fraction of such circumstances, right? But you probably all heard like many people lost their religion during the Holocaust, yes? Mm-hmm. But many people found it. Many people who weren't religious became religious. Many people who were religious became not religious, and many people who were religious stayed religious, and many people who weren't religious stayed not. In other words, the Holocaust had nothing to do with people's religiosity. Right? Free will is free will under all circumstances. Right? People made their choices under whatever the circumstances were. There was no rule, there's no law. So again, my sensei's father, rest in peace, right? He lived into his 90s, right, after all this. He had been religious before the war, and he was still religious after the war. In fact, I heard a few stories about him. He was the guy who was the first one in the morning at the synagogue to open it up, to take out the books, to get things ready, and he was the last one at night to leave, to close things up and make sure everything was clean and neat. A guy who survived everything he survived, lost his whole family, and he was still loyal to Hashem and to the Jewish people. Mind-boggling. And not just that, but after losing everything to rebuild, incredible. But that's not entirely fair. Because that's not just, in my personal experience, that sounds incredible. But if you put it on the scale of the Jewish people for thousands of years, he did exactly what the Jewish people have always done. Most of us. There's always exceptions. The Jewish people have always, you've all heard, of course, the legend of the phoenix, right? The bird that when it dies, it's reborn from the ashes. So the rabbis talk about the phoenix in the Talmud. I never learned that particular Talmud myself. I don't know. Maybe take a look at the Zoo rabbi, Rabbi Natan Slifkin. He probably got some good articles on it. I should read that article one day. I haven't had the chance yet. Maybe after today. I'm thinking about it now. But the phoenix, right? The Jewish people are like the phoenix, right? Our whole world ends. Everything is burned down in fire. Which, by the way, side point, but interesting historical side point. The word Holocaust means large fire. If you find old newspaper articles about the Great Chicago Fire of 1800 something, 1880s or something like that. In the newspaper, it was called the Holocaust. That word became associated with the destruction of the Jewish people in World War II. But the word itself, like if you look up its exact definition in the dictionary, it means large destructive fire. Right. So the Holocaust, the Jewish people, where the Jewish people was entirely Eastern European Jewry, is gone. When David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, when he was trying to build the first Israeli government, the rabbis at the time, they made a deal with him. Right? It's called the religious status quo. I'm not an expert in Israeli politics. Don't ask me any questions. I know very, very basic stuff. The religious status quo is that the Orthodox rabbis are in charge of like the religious aspects of the state of Israel, meaning marriage, death and burial, conversion, things like that. So the story goes that when Ben Gurion made this deal with them, that many of his fellow socialist, atheist, Israelis were like, "What are you doing, giving the rabbis so much of this power?" And he responded, because this is right after the Holocaust, right, within a few years, he responded, like, that world was destroyed. These are the last ones. In another generation, we're not going to have to worry about them anymore. Now, my son just came home for a short vacation, learns in Jerusalem in a yeshiva called the Mir. Have you guys ever heard of the yeshiva called the Mir?
Yeah.
The Mir is Russian for the world, right? The Mir was a yeshiva in Eastern Europe. It survived the Holocaust. Barely, because they got away to China, right? A lot of great stories there. Japanese occupied China, great stories. So the Mir survived, they came to Yerushalayim, they restarted, they had very, very few students. My son's class, his Talmud class, and the rabbi who teaches it teaches one in Yiddish and one in Hebrew. My son goes to the Yiddish class. How many boys are learning Talmud from one rabbi in one class? Now, to be fair, it's one of the biggest classes in the world, so I'm not saying it's typical, but just to give you an idea. 600 boys in one class. My son's class is bigger than all of the full-time yeshiva students in Poland before World War II. Certainly the Mir Yeshiva is, but maybe even his class is bigger. It says the number of people today learning Torah full-time is by far the largest it's been since the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Just one yeshiva, the Mir, has got 6,000, 7,000 full-time Torah students, adult full-time Torah students. And then you add in Hebron, Panovich, massive places. And then come to America. Go to BMG, Beis Medrash Gavoa in Lakewood, right? Or all the other, which is I think the largest yeshiva in America. Thousands and thousands of full-time adult, before marriage, after marriage, in Kollel, right? Full-time Torah students. This is a phoenix. World War II ended the yeshiva world. It was almost entirely destroyed. Almost all, like 95% of the full-time, high-quality Torah students on earth were in Poland, Lithuania, Russia, and were all destroyed, except for a few who got out. America, there were a few, very few full-time, high-level Torah students. That world is gone. Now, completely rebuilt, not just rebuilt, much bigger than it was. And with a Jewish population smaller than the Jewish population before World War II. There were 16 million Jews in the world before World War II. Today there's 12 million. With a smaller Jewish population, we have more full-time Torah. And that's just one aspect, right? I'm focusing on the Torah aspect, right? But how about all the Jewish wealth that was created after the war? All of the, one of the things that always makes me laugh is like, why do we have so many hospitals named after rabbis or named after Jews? Because in America, I'll come back to this in a second, because this is a pet peeve of mine also. In America was so anti-Semitic before and right after World War II that Jews couldn't find jobs as doctors in hospitals. They weren't allowed. Sorry, no Jews allowed. Whether they said it officially or unofficially. So what did wealthy Jews do when Jews who had businesses and got rich, and then their kids went to college and became doctors? Because that's what Jews do. First they make money, then they send their kids to college, right? So what, historically speaking, right? So what did they do? They said, well, I want my kid to be a doctor, but there's no hospital. You know what I'll do? I'll pay for a hospital so my kid can be a doctor. Right? Same thing with law firms also. Law firms is another issue. I'm not a fan of this so much, but Jews kind of invented the whole litigation culture we have today. The whole ambulance chaser thing was sadly invented by Jews. But to be fair, it's because they weren't allowed to be regular lawyers before that. So many, like the poorer Jewish lawyers became shysters, and the richer ones became partners at new law firms that their parents paid for. I'm oversimplifying, right? But there's a million and one more details to add there. But again, like Jews, the idea of Jewish wealth, people think of Jews being rich, is almost 90% an invention of post-World War II Jewry. 90% of Jewish wealth is a post-World War II invention. In America too. Were there wealthy Jews before World War II? Yeah, there were a few, some big ones you know of. Were there wealthy Jews around the world? Sure. If you want to spend a few hours entertaining yourself, just Google Zionist bankers. And you could just not sleep for a few weeks and go down a rabbit hole of Jewish conspiracy theories. Have fun! Reminds me of the famous joke, two older Jews sitting down reading newspaper. One of them is reading the New York Times, the other one is reading Aryan Nation.
Oh, yeah, I heard.
And the guy looked, New York Times, he goes, Shlomi, why are you reading a neo-Nazi newspaper? He said, look, you read New York Times, it says that this war is happening, and this sickness is happening, and this Jew is going to jail, and this Jew is going to jail. He says, I read Aryan Nation. Jews control the weather, Jews control the banks. It feels good! We joke about it, but my wife just pointed out to me just a few weeks ago, in the United States Congress, there was some U.S. congresspeople, congresspersons, congressmen,
Yeah.
congresshumans, we're having a whole discussion about how the collapse of the Argentinian economy was Israel's fault. In U.S. Congress, like you can see it, like the transcripts, what they're talking about. They're trying to blame the Jews in general and Israel in particular. Like, this is nothing new. What was it, Marjorie Taylor Greene or something was the one who said something about Jewish space lasers? Was that her? Or Jewish weather satellites? I forget who. It's all over. It was. She has an acronym. Okay, yeah. So none of this is any. You laugh about it, but it's making a comeback. A lot of funny stuff. The problem is with this funny stuff is that it's not a very long stretch from the absolute irrationality and stupidity of some anti-Semitism to saying, well, Jews are lizards who control weather, therefore we need to kill them all so we save humanity. It's sadly, historically speaking, it's not that far away. Anyway, it's a bit of a tangent. Oh, my pet peeve that I was talking about. People talk about how anti-Semitism in America is so terrible. It's the worst that it's ever been. Only if you paid no attention to American history. Between World War I and World War II, the most popular radio show in the 1930s during the Great Depression was by a father. I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly because I only read it, like McLaughlin or something like that. Some Irish Catholic. Oh, did I pronounce it right? Thank you. And he had the most popular radio show in America. Something like 75% of all Americans that had a radio listened to him every day. Like, can you imagine a TV show like there's no such thing, right? Imagine Nielsen ratings, right? And he was unbelievably anti-Semitic. Get the Jews out, throw them out of the country. Like, it's yes, anti-Semitism is terrible. I'm not trying to say that it's not rising. It is. Is it getting worse? It is. But to say that it's worse than it's been in America in the past is just ignorance of American history. It was much worse before, in many, many times than it is now, and Hashem should protect us that it never returns to even a fraction of what it was before. Okay. When we take a look at Jewish history, and you take a look at Jewish individuals, and I gave you a few examples, I'll give you some more, right? If you travel today, and I've seen it with my own eyes, to the holy city of Hebron. You guys have heard of Hebron? Right? It is the place where the Ma'arat Mechpelah, the cave of the doubles, where our holy foremothers and forefathers are buried there together. And it's a very tough city to live for Jews. Only a few dozen Jews who live there allowed officially, with like 90,000, surrounded by 90,000 Arab Muslims who mostly want them dead. And there's a pretty heavy IDF presence there to protect them. At one point during the Second Intifada, which I had the dubious privilege of living through while I was in Israel, there was a lot of shooting and attacks that was happening in Hebron. And one of the things that happened was an Arab sniper shot and killed a baby in her carriage. Shalhevet Pass.
Yeah.
And you can see the plaque still today at the spot where this baby was shot right by a sniper. What did her parents, what did the family, what did the community do? They didn't, raise money for funds to launch attacks. They didn't, don't get me, I'm not saying that there aren't any violent settlers, but the number of them is unbelievably small. I just saw recently, somebody did a very thorough study of all of the times that Israeli settlers, which by the way, I hate that word. That word itself is buying into their propaganda, but since that's the word people use, like even the word Palestinian also is propaganda. We're the Palestinians, they stole the name from us, but fine. Use the language the way it's used, otherwise people won't understand you. So there was a thorough study done by all settler violence. Every time a settler has killed an Arab in the past, since there have been settlers, since 1967. I think the total number is like 188 in decades. And there are millions of people who live in the area. So purely statistically, 188, that's a bad weekend in Detroit. That's a bad weekend in Chicago, right? It's a very small number compared to people there. But even that, it's very misleading because 90% of them were either they were being attacked and were defending themselves, or it was a border dispute with people next to them. It wasn't like we're going to plan an attack like a terrorist. There were a couple. Of course, the most famous one, Baruch Goldstein, who killed, I forget the number, but a very large number of Arab worshippers in Mars Machpelah in Hebron. But he's a gigantic exception. And the vast majority of Jews throughout the world, every time there's one of these attacks, what do? We condemn them. We say this is not our values. If the person is still alive, they are arrested and tried, and if guilty, jailed and punished. It is not the Jewish way, and this is not new to the state of Israel. It's been like this for thousands of years. The last time this ended was one of the reasons the temple was. The last time this wasn't the case with the Zealots in Jerusalem was one of the reasons the temple was destroyed. We talked about this. Vigilantism and violence in Judaism was a prior class we had a few months ago, or weeks ago even. The overwhelming Jewish response, and people say, "Oh, it's because you were in the ghetto and you were weak." And it's also in Israel and you're strong. And it's also in communities that weren't in Israel, but were in ghettos and were very wealthy and powerful Jewish communities in their own right. The overwhelming Jewish response to tragedy is we build back better. We build new synagogues. We pay for, not an attack on us, but the synagogue that I go to recently, it was a tragedy. It was a young father in his early 40s who was having surgery and he died on the table. A little bit younger than me, a young father. Very, very terrible tragedy. Right? The synagogue immediately, we're gonna write a Torah scroll in his honor. We're raising money to put together a Torah scroll. We're gonna put a cover on it with his name on it. It's like again and again tragedies, right? Happen to Jews as communities, as individuals. The Jewish response is, of course, we cry, and of course, if we're being attacked, we defend ourselves. But we don't sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. We don't sit around with resentment and negativity. We say, what can I do to make light from this darkness? Right? How many times, those of you who are on the trip, did you guys go to where's Joseph? Guys, the trip in Israel, the trip that was just in Israel recently, they went to this park, Nachal Oz Park, I think it's called Nachal Oz, right? What happened? Why is there a park there? Because during the Intifada, 3 Jewish boys were kidnapped and murdered there. And the whole Jewish people for a couple of days was praying for sadly, our prayers were not answered and they were found murdered. But what did their parents and families and communities do? They came to the spot, which was filled with trash, and it was abandoned or whatever, and just started cleaning it up. And they started planting trees and plants, and they started putting together playgrounds. And it became a national and even international obsession. We brought rage groups there to dig up weeds and to put together little walls and to clip trees and to just the whole place now. It's more and more. It's become a Jewish international project of building something beautiful. And there are plaques around. Different communities have come. This synagogue, this community, this group that has come to build something in the name of these 3 boys. I mean, I can again. Just in the reading I did today, I can go on for hours and all the different examples I've seen. But at this point, I think you get the point. If you take a look, whether it's before the temple was destroyed, whether it's in the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash, the Middle Ages, Jewish communities from Spain. Oh, Spain's a great example. How many people here are Sephardi? Right? What does Sephardi mean? It means Spanish. The Spanish Jewish community was destroyed. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And on the day he sailed, that day, right, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella made a decree that any Jew left in Spain either converts or dies. That's why there's a lot of things about maybe Columbus was Jewish, maybe some people on his boats were Jewish. That's a whole fascinating story on its own. Which leads into, if you've never read the book, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, that's a cool read. There were a lot of Jewish pirates because they were trying to get revenge against the Spanish for all the stuff they did to the Jews in Spain. And they even, at one point, the Jews controlled the island of Jamaica. Jamaica was a Jewish colony for a little bit, until the British came and did what British people do for centuries, which is conquer and take over everything. That being said, the Spanish Jewry was completely destroyed, gone. Have you ever heard of the Golden Age of Spain? Right? Some of the greatest Jewish rabbis, philosophers, philanthropists, business people. Some of our greatest rabbis, Rambam, right? Ibn Ezra, the Bartanura, Barbanel, right? No, Bartanura, sorry, was from Italy later. I meant the Barbanel, right? I think the Sephardim pronounce it Abravanel, right? You have some of the greatest Jewry that ever existed was in Spain from the 1100s up until the 1400s. Gone, completely gone. But Sephardi Jewry is vibrant. Sephardi Torah scholarship, Sephardi business people, all over the Middle East, all over, and now the rest of the world, rebuild. The Ashkenazi, the worst thing to ever happen to the Ashkenazi Jews before the Holocaust was the Ukrainian massacres in the 1600s by Bogdan Khmelnytsky, right? And there's a statue of him in Kiev. We had a rage trip that was in Kiev, and we drove by the statue of Bogdan, and I said to the ragers, I said, this is Hitler, hundreds of years before Hitler. He says, we should stop and pee on his statue. And the tour guide, who was a Ukrainian woman, said, no, pee on Bogdan, no.
Of course they say that.
And no, we don't celebrate Bogdan. The Russians forced him here. I was like, okay, Ukraine is independent. Why is the statue still there? I don't know if it's still there now.
It's still there.
It's still there? Okay, there you go. Right.
Until gymnastics.
And so if Ukraine only has the statue there because of Russia, why do they still have it? Yeah, sure, right, whatever. What Eastern European Jewry was terribly destroyed, right? And again, don't read it unless you want to have nightmares. What the Cossacks and their supporters did to the Jews in Ukraine during that time is like October 7th times 10. Right? Unbelievably horrible things. But Eastern European Jewry didn't die. It had some of our greatest Torah scholarship. How about, you guys ever heard of the Hasidim? Right? You ever hear of the yeshiva world? That was all after that. Right? The Hasidic revolution, the modern yeshivish revolution from Lithuania, all of that was post these most horrible massacres. Okay, I made my point. So, to summarize conceptually, for us as individuals, we need to understand, because we all have catastrophes in our lives. It's just part of being human. And maybe even more part of being Jewish. Right? We all have terrible things happen to us. People lose jobs, people get sick, people, God forbid, lose loved ones, people have terrible tragedies all the time. What our rabbis, what our history, and what our Torah teaches us is that, of course, we mourn, but how do we mourn? There's a halacha in the Torah. I'll start ending with this idea. There's a halacha in the Torah that when Hashem should protect us, we shouldn't know such things. When somebody loses a loved one, what do? They tear their clothes. You heard of this? Yeah, that's part of the beginning of the Shiva process. They tear clothing. They say the bracha, blessed is the true judge, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, and they tear their clothes. The Torah says it is forbidden for a Jew to cut their flesh or to rip out their hair because of mourning. And instead, we tear our clothes. So the rabbis spent a lot of time discussing it. Why? Because it was the custom and culture for pagans that, and by the way, it still happens today. There are places around the world you can do this today where they'll lose a loved one and they'll actually cut their flesh. They will make themselves bleed, or they'll whip themselves, or they'll do something that causes themselves actual injury, or rip out their hair from their beard or their head. Right? The Torah forbids Jews to do this. Instead, we tear our clothes. Right? Because what's the difference? In Jewish consciousness, we say, is it okay to cry if we lose a loved one? Of course, not just okay, but it's actually a good, meritorious thing. You may even call it a mitzvah, right? But the Talmud says, don't cry too much. It is actually forbidden to mourn for too long or too heavily. Why is it? What do you mean? Why is it forbidden to mourn too much? If God forbid somebody loses a loved one, let them mourn how they want. No, because mourning too much makes a fundamental error. Because I would cry, if my best friend is, especially back in the day before we had cell phones, Zoom calls, and airplanes, if my best friend was taking a trip and I'm not going to see him for a few months or a few years, right? How about people who send off their kids to go to yeshiva and not see them for years, right? You could cry, makes sense. Why are you crying? They're still alive. No, but I'm going to miss you. I love you so much, I don't want you to go away, I'm going to miss you. That is the type of crying when we cry for mourning. As we say in Russian, we're not saying das vidanya, we're saying uvidimся. Right, we're not saying goodbye, we're saying we'll see you later. Lehitraot, as we say in Hebrew. Do you believe you're going to see your loved ones again? Of course. That's why even for a parent, what is the maximum time that we say Kaddish for them? A year. The custom is only to go 11 months. But a year. And that's it. Not more. We tear clothing, because what's clothing? Clothing is not you. Clothing is external to you. I'm not having a permanent loss. I'm going to see them again. It's painful. It's very painful. Actually, the halacha is if someone loses a loved one, they tear their clothes, they're allowed to fix the clothing. But if they lose a parent, you're not allowed to fix it perfectly. You have to always see the stitches, it's uneven, right? Because parent is even heavier, right? But we don't tear our flesh, we don't rip our hair. So now apply these teachings to life in general. We always have tragedies, individually as Jewish people. Don't mourn too much. Don't fall. Don't disappear. don't spiritually or psychologically die. No, we're like a phoenix in the ashes. When the appropriate mourning is complete, we rise up and we say, right, even the Kaddish itself, what is Kaddish? What is Kaddish?
Kaddish is when you pray when you lose someone.
Right, what is it?
Recognition of God.
Oh, very good. Most people say it's the prayer for the dead.
Yeah.
It doesn't mention the dead. Kaddish doesn't mention the dead at all. The whole Kaddish is prayers of God. Praises of God, sorry. Why do we say praises of God after losing a loved one, and we don't even mention the loved one? They're not mentioned. And we're not asking God for anything. It's literally just praise. So the rabbis say, because it's a merit to the dead person's soul. Because look, their influence on you, that instead of having resentment and hatred towards God and towards life, you praise Hashem. That's a merit to the person. We say Kaddish, it's praise. We build back better. We create new charities. We build new buildings. We add on more mitzvos. I don't want to embarrass anybody, you don't have to raise your hand, right? But I know that after October 7th, many people took on mitzvahs that they had never done before or didn't do consistently in the merit of the saving the Jewish people and in the merit of the people that were killed. Many, many people have done that. And that's a very, very Jewish thing to do. When the world is ending, we build a new one. That's the Jewish response. Questions?
Yeah. Why is it that Jewish people are so prevalent to accepting like tragedies or accepting the anything bad that happens? Is there like something about Jews that easily
It's
also
faith.
accept things? Faith?
The difference between, and not only Jews have faith, obviously, but the uniqueness of Jewish faith, historically speaking, is that we have faith after the fact. When something terrible has happened, we say, okay, Hashem, you allowed or you caused, because you're God, you're in control of everything, this terrible thing to happen. It must be for a reason. There must be some good, and therefore, and that's why we have the faith to try to get up and do something more. We don't end, we build, we begin. Every tragedy is a new beginning because we have faith that there's a reason for everything. But before the tragedy happens, we don't accept it. Before the tragedy happens, we fight tooth and nail to end it, to prevent it. As the Talmud says, a person who's even with the head on the chopping block and the sword about to cut off their head, they never stop having hope and praying. We always fight. This is why Abraham challenged God before he went to destroy the evil cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He said, what if there's righteous people there? And he fought with God. And Moshe fought with God, right? It's the Jewish way to fight with God. To say no. In fact, that's what Israel means. Yisrael, the one who fights with God. We struggle with God, right? But if it's happened already, what are you going to do? Tell God to undo what happened in the past? We don't do that. I mean, he could. God has power over everything. But it's not our way to try to retroact it. Now we say, okay, I tried my best. This terrible thing still happened. Now I have to accept that that's Hashem's will. And now I'm going to try to learn, to build, to grow, and to make the world closer to Mashiach. Every time we rise up from the ashes and build something better, we are putting one more brick in the holy temple in Shemayim and one more step closer to the coming of Mashiach. May he come speedily and we have no more sorrow.